All right, I'm joined by our news editor, Jessy Carveth. Jessy, we're bringing you in off the bench to start a playoff game here. We just recorded this week's podcast and it went out this morning, but we have been inundated with questions, DMs. I've been getting texts the last couple of days about the story we've been reporting on, Jessy. Ultrarunner Camille Herron and her Wikipedia controversy. A lot has happened in the last 48 hours with this story. So we thought we'd get together and do a little bit of an emergency pod that we'll put out on the feed right away after we finish recording, because there's been some huge events, including the fact that Herron has been effectively dropped by Lululemon, which was her main sponsor. She was one of Lululemon's big athletes. So that's a huge bit of news that we've just dropped this morning here. So Jessy, I want to turn to you to go through exactly what's happened here, who Herron is, putting this story into a little bit of context, a broader context for our audience. You know, maybe you're listening here and you're like, I've heard about Herron, or I saw in your newsletter this morning that there's this controversy with Wikipedia. I don't quite understand it. So we're here to kind of unpack that. And also, I think, Jessy, like, let's say the quiet parts out loud a little bit in this pod and clear the air a little bit, because I think that running can be really polite and careful, and people don't want to talk about what they're really thinking about, which is maybe part of the reason why we got into this mess in the first place with Herron. But I think there's a lot to unpack here that you would only read from anonymous posters on Reddit. So we'll do our best to stick to the facts and sort of unspool it for our listeners here. So before we do that, I'll do a little primer on Herron in case you're not 100% clear. And the irony here, Jessy, is that the main thing Herron's accused of doing is effectively manipulating her own persona particularly on Wikipedia, and then downplaying or cutting away at the achievements of her rivals and of other ultra runners. So weirdly here, it's a bit of a challenge to actually write the biography of Camille Herron, because she's been trying to write her own biography on Wikipedia, as we've discovered this week. But I'll try to do my best here. So Herron is a 40.
There's a reason why my elementary school teachers always told me that we can't use Wikipedia as a source.
Indeed, your elementary school teachers and Wikipedia. Oh wow. Yeah.
Classic.
I feel this is like the running joke in the pod is like, Caitlin and I are old and you and Alex are not old. The internet was not around when I was in elementary school. But it's like, that's the most basic thing that everyone understands is if you're trying to use a source, Wikipedia is something you have to be very careful about. And this is the reason why. So Camille Herron, she's 42 years old. She is now in 2024, a fairly well-established ultra runner. She makes a lot of noise in the ultra trail scene. She, going back, I'd say about 10 to 15 years, she was kind of a relatively unknown kind of middling road runner. She's from Oklahoma. She ran for the University of Tulsa. She was not a big time NCAA product. And then she got into running marathons. She had some success. I think her PR in the marathon is something like 2:37. I have it written down here, 2:37.14 from 2012, according to World Athletics. And she was doing weird stuff. She was trying to run and win a marathon of any size in all 50 states at that point, in like the kind of mid 2010s. She was running Guinness World Records dressed as a superhero, which she did in 2:48.51 and got a Guinness World Record dressed up as Spider-Woman. She was doing all kinds of stuff to like get attention effectively. And it was middling success, but then she kind of like cracked the code when she started running ultras and just longer distance stuff and going after those records. That started around 2015. And then in 2017, she won the prestigious Comrades Marathon, which is actually an ultra marathon of, I think, 89 kilometers in South Africa. It's a pretty prestigious event that's been going on for many years. It garnered her quite a bit of attention because she was one of very few Americans to ever win the race. And then from there on in, it was like doubling and tripling down on ultra distance events and chasing after various records in everything from, 100K, 100 miles, all the way up to like 24-hour races. And then most prominently, perhaps this past March, in partnership with Lululemon, they did this 6-day marketing event, which was called Further, not Farther, Further, in which she and a group of women ran this loop in California for 6 straight days. And she was going after a variety of records, including the outright 6-day record. Okay. So that's who she is. That's a snapshot of Camille Herron. Why we're talking about her now is that this week, the last few days, it's been revealed that she and her coach and husband, a guy named Connor Holt, have been really busy on Wikipedia over the years. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Jessy?
Yeah, so there's essentially been 2 Wikipedia accounts, and the first one got flagged, and so that's why they started the second one. But they've made a total of over 300 edits to Camille's own and other notable ultra runners' Wikipedia page, and essentially she's kind of fluffing up her own Wikipedia page to make her sound like this very, very, and she is a great ultra runner, but really upselling herself with some very fluffy words, which you're not supposed to use on Wikipedia. Wikipedia's, they want to keep it down the middle. And then really, really like downplaying and like removing accolades from other really big ultra runners like Courtney Dauwalter or Kilian Jornet, so some other big names in the ultra game, and she's essentially trying to make them, I guess, disappear off Wikipedia, it seems.
So this has been reported on by a number of sites, and you're in trouble when, and there's a real controversy at foot when you Google a name, and I Googled Camille Herron this morning just to kind of see what was up on in terms of Google hits, and like some of the top hits were like, who is Camille Herron at the center of a running controversy? And it's like these sites, these aggregator sites that just jump on anything that's getting a lot of web traffic. And I was like, oh, that's bad news. And we've seen that here. I mean, we sort of look behind the curtain at our web traffic, and it's like, okay, there's a huge amount of interest in this story, and it's kind of one of the reasons why we're talking about it right now.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Okay, so she was found out, her and her husband, and then sort of chapter 2 or act 2 of this story is yesterday. So Wednesday, you report on her husband sort of tries to step in front of the firing squad here and take the bullet for her.
Yeah, so essentially her husband sent one of the really popular running threads an email. Essentially, it's this big long spiel, but essentially comes down to this. It was his fault. He was the one that wrote it all. Camille had nothing to do with it. He said that they were on vacation and the emails that he initially received landed in his spam. And so that's why it's taken him so long to reply and all that. And a lot of people aren't buying it. And it's kind of funny because it seems like the pair of them have responded to this whole thing in like a fight or flight type of way. Whereas Connor, her husband, Holt, is doing the fighting because in his email, he blamed his actions, that he's the one that's doing all this. He blamed his actions on that he's doing it because he's defending Camille from cyber bullies and that she's getting harassed online. And so that's why he's making all these Wikipedia edits. And then he actually listed 4 or 5 of the editors that he was trying to call out. Whereas, but these editors are actual, like, I think serial Wikipedia editors that have thousands of edits and just seem to, they just want to keep Wikipedia as resourceful as it can be and as informative as it can be. And so, like, for example, one of these editors has almost 250,000 edits, and you kind of think to yourself, was he really just aiming to bully Camille online? So Connor's kind of, taking the fight approach, whereas Camille, on the other hand, is going with the flight approach. And we haven't heard anything from her. She's deleted all her social medias. She hasn't made any statements, no emails. She's essentially gone off the grid. So they seem to be taking this like 1-2 approach to it. But most recently her husband kind of stepped in front of the bus for her. So.
Yeah. And she has an athlete website that is now down or is password protected. So it's effectively offline. And she's also taken all of her social accounts offline as well. That's the main sort of, excuse or reasoning that they have been putting forward. And she also tweeted this just before she took her X page offline, which is she basically said that, like, effectively none of this is true. This is all just accusations that are being made by kind of like haters and cyber bullies that are making this up to like defame or attack me. Whether or not that's true is a gigantic question mark. I would say a lot of people have grown pretty cynical of that argument.
The thing is with that too is it's kind of hard to buy that because the two accounts that made the Wikipedia edits were connected to Camille's email address and Holt's IP address. So unless that's not actually her email and that's not his IP address, it's a bit hard to buy that story, I think.
Yeah. So moving ahead to Wednesday afternoon, we discovered after doing a little bit of digging, and we've reported on it today in our story that's on the site today, that she also had a third a handle on Wikipedia, account on Wikipedia, the initial account, which was just Run Camille. It's pretty obvious that it's her. And that was the account that actually created her Wikipedia entry, which we should say these are serious no-nos on Wikipedia, and everyone kind of knows it. Like, you don't write your own Wikipedia article. Now, we've all encountered on Wikipedia an article where we're like, I'm pretty sure that athlete or personality, maybe even just initially, if not overall, has written their own article or had their PR person write it for them or whatever. But in Herron's case, she wrote her own article and then kind of hovered over it and made many, many edits over the course of a year and a half. And if you go back and read the sort of genesis of that article, of her sort of hagiography, as it were, that she's writing about herself, it's, first of all, self-mythologizing. And second of all, it morphs from being, in 2015, she's talking about being like a serial marathon runner and having sort of chasing after these achievements. But effectively in 2015, Jessy, she's kind of a nobody. Like, she's somebody who, she's qualified for the Olympic trials. She's run in and around, just under 240. But like, in the big bad world of elite pro distance running, road running, that's nothing, right? And like, whether or not you deserve a Wikipedia article is a question mark. And, there's no real kind of like rules around who gets a Wikipedia article and who doesn't. But one of the rules of Wikipedia is you don't get to make your own if you want one, right?
Yeah. Otherwise everyone would have one.
Exactly. Jessy, we can get into this a little bit later after we continue unpacking this, but like, you're a pro athlete, and it's like, you're kind of somebody who is on the edge of maybe you should have a Wikipedia article, right?
I do not.
You're on the verge of, you do not. Exactly. And you're not going to go out and write one, and no. I'm not going to write one for you. Right.
Oh, darn.
Sorry. Yeah. Cause Wikipedia has very stringent rules about bias, right? About, this is a code of conduct thing. Anyway, so they've been booted off Wikipedia now a couple of times for breaking these rules. And I think the more egregious thing here that everyone's kind of up in arms about is it's like one thing if you're going to like puff yourself up. And we should say she also, her or her husband, it's unclear, the accounts attributed to both of them have also been inserting her into bigger Wikipedia articles like the ultrarunning article, like the overall, like very big, very long, effectively like the history of the ultra running movement. She has
Like,
been
what
inserted
is
into that.
ultrarunning?
Yeah. These accounts have inserted her into that article in a bunch of different places and articles like that. Whether or not she should be inserted in the ultra running article, she probably should be, but it's just not up to her or her team or her husband to do that. Right. So that's one thing. I think the thing that people are taking umbrage with is the fact that she has been kind of tearing down competition by subtraction through Wikipedia editing, kind of like trying to downplay the success of others, which is a pretty gross and tacky thing to do. Now, Jesse, we should also say that in parallel to this controversy that's playing out around Wikipedia, at the exact same time, there's this other dialogue about Herron that's surfacing at the same time. And this is people within the ultra community in particular, and particularly the last couple of months, I think in the aftermath of the Lululemon further 6-day thing, people started talking about her as a role model and whether or not she is a good patron of the sport and someone who, you know, is positioning herself, or Lululemon has been positioning her as a real kind of like positive change leader of change in women's sport and women's running. And a few athletes and others in the ultra world have kind of come out of the woodwork on Reddit and Facebook and have a different opinion of what their experience is like dealing with her.
Yeah. So there's one Danish runner, for example, and I think this is like just a super recent and prominent example. So a Danish runner, Stein Rex, she recently broke the 6-day record, which Camille broke just a few months ago at that Lululemon event. And so when Camille broke it, it had been standing for over 30 years. So it was like a big deal that she broke it. And not 3 months later, Rex came in and quit that record from her. And the next day, rather than waking up and being celebrated on news outlets, Rex woke up to messages, emails, DMs from all these big running outlets, being accused of cheating, mainly of having pacers and also wearing illegal shoes, which she didn't, because the entire event was broadcasted live, and everyone like right away was like, what are you talking about? Like, there's no way, we can just check the video here. And so it turns out it was Camille who had put these like false accusations trying to not get her record ratified, because then it surpassed her own. And that was left on, so that was a comment left on another ultra runner's page, which I think honestly, this one that I'm about to tell you almost kind of like is a bit worse than Steinrex's, because Steinrex is like, she's passing Camille Herron's record. Like, she's beating Camille Herron right there. So it's like, obviously like Camille might be like a little nettled about that. But then Canadian Victoria Brown, she's an ultra runner and a triathlete who recently set a Canadian record for 48 hours. So a Canadian record. Now,
okay,
I highlighted that again, Canadian. Camille is not Canadian, so she is not at all eligible for this record. Okay?
Right.
She still submitted false accusations attempting to invalidate Victoria Brown's record. And Herron even went to a major online running publication that had talked about Brown's record and tried to get the story removed. So Brown like posted this massive thing on Facebook and was like one of the first ones to like truly just blatantly say, Camille Brown did this. I don't understand why. But I think like one thing that really is kind of the big takeaway with this is that she's pulling women down. And for me, especially being, I'm a cyclist, so not an ultra runner, but I'm in a very male dominated endurance sport. It's taken a long time for women to get where they are in sport. And it's like, we don't even have full equality yet in most sports. Like there's still there's more opportunities for men. They're getting paid more and all that. And not just ultra running and not just cycling, in a lot of sports. And, there's been a lot of trailblazing women who have done a lot and sacrificed a lot to get more women in sport and get more opportunities for women. And I feel like Camille, she's pulling down all these women, and she's accusing them of cheating and trying to get them negative publicity. And no one wants to deal with that. No one wants that. And I feel like that's almost, taking some steps back in women's sport, because, girls who are maybe interested in running are going to look this up and they're going to see this and they're going to be like, oh, well, this doesn't seem like a very friendly sport, a very friendly environment. And it could take away opportunities or chances for other women to want to enter the sport, I guess, in a way. And I think there's just a bigger picture to it all, that she's just pulling down women. And I think, I don't know, personally, being in a male dominated sport, it's really challenging to see someone almost taking a step back for women in sport when we've worked so hard to already get where we are. And we're not even there yet. So I think that's honestly one of the biggest issues I have with this, is that we don't even have parity yet, but she's pulling us back in a way. So
it's particularly galling, considering that in March she was trotted out as the kind of figurehead or main character of this Lululemon marketing effort, the further concept, the 6-day ultra. And she was sort of seen as the big sister of this group of women that were, because she was the most experienced, the most accomplished, and was going after all the biggest records.
Yeah, exactly.
And the whole event was sort of fashioned around a women's only designed shoe, because Lululemon's argument is that throughout the history of distance running, women have been effectively just wearing a smaller version of a man's shoe, and that the thing that you use to design the shoe and the fit and feel of the shoe and all of the sort of science and biometrics around shoe design have historically just been with male athletes in mind.
Yeah.
And so their whole idea, or their marketing premise at least, was we're going to design a shoe for women, and then we're going to take it out onto this closed course. And for 6 days, we're going to have a variety of different women of all different ability levels to test these shoes out, and to kind of test what their real limits are over a really long period of time. And Herron was sort of positioned as the top tier elite level athlete at the front of that, spearheading this event. And is kind of the role model and the leader. And so given that, it's terribly ironic and probably a real slap in the face for some, particularly those who maybe weren't super familiar with her as an ultra runner before that. So I would think, okay, so we said earlier, we're going to sort of say the quiet parts out loud a little bit here. There's something going on. You've inferred, we said before we hit the record on the pod, you're there's a lot between the lines going on in these stories here.
Yeah.
I think there's two different types of running content audience out there, of runners who kind of are in the running scene. There's the dyed-in-the-wool runner who knows exactly who Camille Herron is, who's followed her exploits, particularly in the ultra trail world, that sub community or that subculture. And then there's the greater, broader audience, of which, most of the people listening are probably this greater, broader audience who maybe have heard who she is because the Lululemon thing, or just have some sense of her because they just saw a social post about one of the records she broke, but they don't really know who she is. And I think what's going on here is that former group of people who really know who she is kind of know that she's behaved in a certain way for a long time in this way. and nobody was going to say anything out loud about it. And now there's a bit of Schadenfreude.
The floodgates have opened.
The floodgates have opened, and I think people are kind of tap dancing on her proverbial grave here a little bit. Whether that's right or wrong is a big question. And sometimes I think with social media backlash, it can be too intense. And or even now I'm seeing like there's a backlash to the backlash, where I'm seeing like, for example, like there's a Runner's World Sweden op-ed that I just saw posted on social media that was like, this person was like, we're being too cruel to Camille. We should back off a little bit here, which, fair enough. And also we should say this year, Herron has said, and this is now included in her Wikipedia page, that she is been diagnosed with autism and ADHD, seemingly to kind of like offset or contextualize some of her behavior. And I will say this about that, because now what's happening is I think a lot of people are becoming very cynical of that sort of tact. And I would say this, that if she is indeed, diagnosed with these diagnoses, then okay, that's one thing. But that also does not excuse your behavior. It does not excuse the personal responsibility you must take as a public person and as an athlete, and as a teammate and as a brand representative. And if these are not true diagnoses, shame on her. I mean, that's awful. But you know what? Like we don't know these things, and that's that. But something that I feel like we should talk about, we should state, because that is something that she's put out there. So it's only fair to her to put that out there as well. Interesting stat, Jessy. So Wikipedia, page views for Camille Herron's Wikipedia article. September 22nd, total number of page views worldwide for her Wikipedia article, 105. Okay. Nothing. I mean, just very few views. September 23rd, 12,290. September 24th, 15,011. So there's a lot of interest in this situation. It's like just jumping like crazy. And I think one of the weird ironies in this scenario is now this whole situation is getting folded into her biography. Like, so now when you go to her Wikipedia article, it's like one of the biographical notes is that she was embroiled in this controversy and that people accused her of these things. And now that will be on her record. And then also, Lululemon has parted ways with her. That's also on her Wikipedia article now. And she's lost her main job, right? She can no longer say I'm a Lululemon athlete, which I think was something that, for someone who is seeking a lot of attention and notoriety and fame, that's a big blow.
Yeah, like I remember because I had reached out to the Lululemon PR, and I remember when I got that email, and that's all they gave me was like a 2-sentence statement. And I read that and I was like, yeah, they just dropped her, in light of everything. But I think like one important thing to also mention, kind of going back a bit, and I read this tweet actually, and like, I think in controversies like this, especially when, like you said, there is two almost like parties of knowledge, one that knows everything and some that kind of just know a bit. I think it's also like, I think it's still important to not mix kind of her running abilities and herself as a person. Cause I think in a lot of these situations, like people's actual like talents and accolades kind of come into question. But I think this is kind of something that's a lot deeper and kind of darker and requires a bit more understanding. And you know what I mean? And I think it's beyond just running now at this point, in my opinion. So
I should read exactly what we got from Lululemon. The representative from Lululemon said to us, we are committed to upholding equitable competition in sport for all and intentionally partner with ambassadors who embody these same values. After careful consideration and conversation, we have decided to end our ambassador partnership with Camille. We want to acknowledge Camille's achievements during our partnership and wish her well in her future endeavors. You never want to get the "we wish her well in her future endeavors" statement attributed to you in any way, because that just basically is the kiss of death from a company, right? We wish you the best. Go away. We're done with you, right? So they've parted ways with her pretty unceremoniously, like effective immediately. We should also say that in some of that back and forth on social media between athletes about their experiences with Camille and their interactions with her, and someone did note like that they were fairly certain that Herron's ambassadorship with Lululemon was contingent on Herron putting up records and getting attention for them. So, you could say in her defense that like she was really heavily financially driven or solely financially driven to set and uphold records, and that it became this like perhaps financial existential threat to her when those records were taken away from her. And so perhaps she was acting out of a little bit of desperation, or at least with that sense of like financial pain if you lose a record. Although I don't think Lululemon's reaching back into her pocket and taking money away if they rewarded her for setting a record and then it gets taken down months later.
And
right?
see, I kind of understand what you're saying there, but then right away, my brain comes back to this recent example that I just gave about Victoria Brown setting a Canadian record, and Camille can't even challenge for that, but she's still trying to take that away from her and like tarnish someone else's reputation. And, like if it was just someone who had passed Camille's record and not someone else who had nothing to do with Camille in this sense, like then, okay, maybe I can buy that excuse like a bit, but even then still probably not. Like I never see any reason to like try and tarnish someone's reputation or take something away that someone has worked so hard for. Like, I mean, I reckon like she's also probably trained and worked just as hard to set the records that she did, because granted, she has set some big records. She has done great things in the sport and has probably worked hard to do those, but the people that pass her or the people that set their own records have worked just as hard to do that too. And I don't know, it just bewilders me to see, someone do that to people. And she would know how hard that they have to work too, because she does it. And it's, like ultra endurance sports are so mentally taxing to begin with. Like even as a cyclist myself, like, yes, I know they're different, but it's still like you spend a lot of time alone. Like you have to put yourself through a lot. And it's like, then to have someone just kind of, like take a crap on that and almost not care in a way and try and take that away from you, it really just sucks. So it's hard for me to find sympathy for her in this kind of situation, I think, just because I know like the mental sacrifice and that it takes to like do these types of things. And for her to just kind of stomp on that is, not something I'm a big fan of.
I think the irony here is that back in 2012, 13, 14, and then in 2015, when she sits down in front of her computer and writes her own Wikipedia article initially, she's clearly a person who is not very well known, but desperately wants to be well known, right? She wants to be famous. She wants notoriety. She wants attention. She craves fame. I'm sure it's like, I don't want to psychoanalyze here, but like, it's not an uncommon behavior, and it's not an uncommon desire. And it's something that, deep insecurity drives a lot of very, very talented people who eventually become quite well known and quite celebrated for their talents, but they're still driven by insecurity. And I think the irony here is that She sits down, writes the Wikipedia article about herself when she's basically a nobody. And then in the interim, she's kind of become a somebody, and not because she's like invented her own character, but because she's actually performed and done things that are kind of interesting. Now, you may have your own feelings about whether or not records that are not contested by many people very often are impressive, but there is something to be said about somebody who like throws down running several hundred kilometers over 6 days. I mean, that's like really interesting. And she's set a bunch of really big deal records. Some of them have been broken, but she's still in the mix and part of the conversation. So the irony here is what she craved and desired so badly all those years ago, she's now kind of effectively achieved, and yet still sort of behaves in this manner, or has someone on her behalf behave in this manner for her, and treats other athletes allegedly in the way that she's treated them. That's kind of awful. And like, Camille Herron is an interesting person, and weirdly enough is probably even a more interesting person now that this has all come to light, right? Not necessarily in a positive way, but in an interesting way. Like, she's always good for a quote. Like, as an example, a Telegraph article from 2019, headline is, quote, "I puked, fouled myself, and collapsed. It was great. Meet the record-breaking ultramarathon runner fueled by beer and burritos, Camille Herron," right? Yeah. So it's like, awesome, good quote, totally bananas, like weird thing to say, but very entertaining, very alluring, very attention grabbing. It's like, I think she's just trying too hard. And I think now this is coming back to haunt her, which, you know, they just live by the sword, die by the sword, I guess.
Yeah, like that's the thing is her legs could have spoken for themselves, but you know, that just, I guess, maybe wasn't enough for her at that particular time, or she wanted it too early, but wasn't willing to enjoy the process, I guess. So, yeah.
A Shakespearean drama plays itself out in ultrarunning. Okay, I think we can cap it at that. We will definitely continue monitoring this story and continue reporting on it. Got a couple questions for Lululemon that we're going to send their way. And, you know, we've put out a request for comment or an opportunity for an interview with both Herron and her husband and coach. They have thus far not responded to our request for comment. But hey, listen, we are more than happy to put them on the record and in any capacity they wish. So if you're listening, chat with us. We'd like to hear your perspective unencumbered. Okay. That's it for this emergency pod. Jessy Carveth, thank you for coming off the bench and scoring a hat trick. That was awesome.
Thank you.
We'll have you on and more in the future, especially as things ramp up in the fall marathon schedule to talk running and racing. All right. Exactly. We'll be back we're going to do an instant reaction pod for the Berlin Marathon on Sunday. So your pod feed from Marathon Handbook is going to be flooded this week. And then we promise we'll just get back to regularly scheduled programming on Thursday of next week. All right.
Talk to you soon. Maybe I'll make it off the bench at some point again.
We're going to call you in for another one. All right. Thanks very much, Jessy.
My pleasure.